that the only way to cross this world, to traverse this world, is to rely on the Qur'an and the Akhirah more than you rely on this world. Because if you put most of your weight on the world and you hold onto that rope barely, very likely you'll fall. You must put all of your strength onto that rope and barely have i'timad, have this just a little bit of leaning on the dunya itself. Right? So holding fast to the Qur'an, and if you think about this image one more in another light, the path is very narrow. Because this world is filled with perilous tests, trials, tribulations, it's very easy to slip up and make a mistake. Very easy. Right? A person goes to college. The fitna is everywhere to make a mistake. It just takes one moment of weakness to make that mistake. Parents aren't there. Family isn't there. Family, friends from childhood aren't there. The accountability is upon you. Right? When you are with your family, when you are with your spouse, and it feels like it's just you and your family, it's easy in that moment to slip when an argument strikes, when an argument happens. It's easy to fight back now. It's easy to lash out. When we're raising children, right, I have 3 kids of my own. It's easy to lose patience sometimes. It's easy to lose patience. It's easy to slip up and make a mistake. At every corner, there is an opportunity to make a mistake. And we would be kidding ourselves if we said we were perfect. We know we're flawed. We know we make mistakes. And we ask Allah for forgiveness. And that's why we hope for Ramadan as well, to achieve that forgiveness. The Prophet ﷺ tells us, this is narrated in Tirmidhi and Abu Dawood, and also An-Nasa'i. If you've heard Sunan Nasa'i, that's not how you say it. Nasa'i. It's Nasa'i, it's not Nasa'i. This was not narrated in the books. So, An-Nasa'i, this narration, the Prophet ﷺ says that when Allah created paradise, He told Jibreel alayhi salam, "Idhab fanzur ilayha." Go and look at Jannah. Go and take a tour of Jannah and come back to me. Tell me what you see. Jibreel alayhi salam goes and he sees the luxuries, the pleasures, the beauty, the unimaginable beauty of Jannah. The place where nobody will feel unhappy. Nobody will feel jealous. When you eat food, you're not going to pass out afterwards. When you eat food, it's only going to make you feel that much more happy. Nobody uses the restroom. If you sweat, the sweat is musk. The sweat is perfume. Right? When Jibreel alayhi salam toured this place and he came back, he reported to Allah, he said, "Oh Allah, I think that anybody who hears about this, they're going to make it here. Because how could someone in their right mind hear about paradise and not work for it?" And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, "Okay, now go to the hellfire. Go to Jahannam. Go take a tour over there." Jibreel alayhi salam, he goes, he takes a tour, he goes, looks at Jahannam, and he sees all the horrendous punishments you may have heard about. The different punishments for each crime, the different levels of Jahannam, the station for the munafiqun, the hypocrites, those who said that you act and they just didn't act at all, right? He sees all of this and he comes back to Allah, trembling, and he tells Allah, "Oh Allah, I fear that everybody will enter this. I fear that everybody will enter this. I fear that anybody who hears about this, anybody who hears about this will not enter this." Why would someone enter this? If they see Jahannam, if they hear about Jahannam, why would they enter it? But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He flips the script. He surrounds Jannah with difficult things. حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةُ بِالْمَكَارِهِ. He surrounds Jannah with fasting, sadaqah, zakah, Qur'an, hajj, dhikr, dua, tahajjud, qiyamul layl. And then He surrounds Jahannam with zina, riba, lying, cheating, backbiting, anger, etc. And then Jibreel alayhi salam says, how is anyone gonna get to Jannah, oh Allah? Because now Jibreel alayhi salam recognizes that although Jannah has ultimate pleasure, infinite pleasures, and although Jahannam has unimaginable horrors, he knows that people will slip up in this world. And that's why when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the Qur'an is the rope of Allah, hablullah, the rope of Allah, the meaning there is that over here, if you do not have the Qur'an, you will slip and fall. You will slip and fall. The test of zina is not easy, especially if you're younger. The test of being kind to your family isn't always going to be easy. The test of remaining firm on your prayers, whether you're going through an easy time or a rough time, exam season, Ramadan, I'm letting you guys know in advance, there is going to be a time change on the 8th of Ramadan. Okay? There's going to be a time change. I believe there might be midterms at that point as well. Am I right? Midterms? Spring break. Oh, alhamdulillah, rabbil alameen. I'm used to the expedited semester, so I was concerned for you guys. Yes, so alhamdulillah, spring break, alhamdulillah, right? But this world is perilous and there are tests and trials, and it's very easy to slip unless you have the Qur'an. So for those who feel like, man, I'm just constantly committing sins. Man, I just keep making mistakes. Why am I struggling to pray on time? Why am I struggling to obey Allah? Why is the disobedience of Allah pleasing to me and the obedience to Allah boring? Well, maybe the answer lies in, when's the last time I picked up the Qur'an? So lesson number one, the Qur'an is not performative. It's not ceremonial. And unfortunately, one of the good things in our communities is that we emphasize the memorization of the Qur'an, right? That's a good thing. But an unfortunate byproduct of this is that we have made the Qur'an into a performative exercise, into a ceremonial function, right? Someone passes away, someone gets married, someone gets engaged, the Qur'an comes out. Ramadan comes, the Qur'an comes out. But the Qur'an has not yet become a part of our everyday life. My teacher, when I graduated, he looked at us graduates dead in the eye, one by one. And he said, the Qur'an should be a part of your life every single day. When you go through a challenge in the day, pick up the Qur'an, open it, read it for a few minutes, close it. Pick it up again, read it, close it. Pick it up again, read it, close it. Because the Qur'an, the primary function is what? Alif Lam Mim. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. It is guidance for those who are aware of Allah. Notice, it's not a book of science. It's not a book of information. I don't know anybody who's opened up Wikipedia and cried out of emotion of how powerful the information was. No, the Qur'an does not claim to be a book of history or a book of science. It claims to be a book of guidance. Meaning, regardless of how smart someone is or how foolish someone may feel, the Qur'an offers guidance, and it is also a tadhkira, a reminder. So regardless of how intellectual someone may be, the Qur'an has benefit in that person's life. Right? There's an example. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Mathali wa mathalukum." The example of me and the example of you is like a person who's in front of this massive blazing fire. Okay, this massive blazing fire. And as we know, bonfires, and when there's bonfires, right? All these, anyone's gone camping before, the moths, the bugs, they all come towards that fire. And the Prophet ﷺ said, all of you are rushing towards that fire. And I'm standing in front of it. And I'm trying to stop you. And I'm grabbing you by your belts, trying to stop you. But I can't stop all of you. I can't stop all of you. Think about that example. The Prophet of Allah ﷺ saying that only those who have proximity to him proximity to revelation, proximity to the Qur'an will be safe. The Qur'an is the rope of Allah. And giving up the rope of Allah is like not having a safety net. The Qur'an keeps your head above water. The Qur'an helps you stay above. The Qur'an enlightens your path. The Qur'an is your light in the dark times. Unfortunately, what happens to us many times is we experience what we call a rough patch, right? One semester, another semester, 1 month, another month. We ask people for help. We ask for advice. We asked 5, 6, 7 different people for advice, and the Qur'an is still sitting in that same spot on that bookshelf, accumulating dust. And we forgot that the Qur'an was the place I was supposed to go when I felt this way. The Qur'an was the place I was supposed to go. The Prophet ﷺ said that the Qur'an is huwa nurul mubin, huwa shifa'un nafi', that it is the clear light. It is shifa', it's a healing. Ismatul liman tamassaka bihi. It is a protection for anyone who adheres to it, who holds it close. Wa najatul liman ittaba'a. And it saves you, it rescues you if you follow it. The Prophet ﷺ said, تَرَكْتُ فِيكُمْ أَمْرَيْنِ لَن تَضِلُّوا مَا تَمَسَّكْتُمْ بِهِمَا كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَسُنَّةَ نَبِيِّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم. The Prophet ﷺ said, I leave you with 2 things, the book of Allah and the sunnah of His Messenger. As long as you hold on to these 2 things, you will never go astray. You'll never go astray. At the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, he explains to us that the key to never to ever go astray, to never get lost, to never go through, you'll go through the rough patch, but to survive through that rough patch, for your iman to be intact throughout that rough patch, I must hold on to the Qur'an and Sunnah like this. I must hold on like this. Excuse me. The Qur'an is not only something we bring into our lives. Aisha radiallahu anha in Al-Adab al-Mufrad by Imam al-Bukhari, she says, كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ. She was asked about the character of the Prophet, and she responded, he was a walking, talking, living, breathing Qur'an. That his character was the Qur'an. You could just tell that this person is an embodiment of the Qur'an. So the way that we can benefit from this is the Qur'an, number 1, should be interacted with daily, with tadabbur, with reflection. The Prophet ﷺ prescribed certain sections, for example, Surah Mulk before you go to bed, Surah Al-Kahf on Fridays, Surah Yasin, right? There are prescribed verses and sections to read in the Qur'an, right? The Prophet ﷺ calls Surah Al-Mulk, one of the names for Surah Al-Mulk, by the way, is Al-Mujadila. And if you know the Qur'an, you know there's another surah named Al-Mujadala or Mujadila, depending on the narration. But this Surah Al-Mulk was called Mujadila because it argues for you. It's your lawyer. Surah Al-Mulk becomes your lawyer on the Day of Judgment. Imagine that. The day where we won't be able to speak, Surah Al-Mulk will present itself before us. Right? So, the Prophet ﷺ taught us that the Qur'an is not only a side character in our story. The Qur'an is our identity. The Qur'an is our identity. The Prophet of Allah ﷺ, the best words to describe him was, he was a walking, talking, living, breathing Qur'an. And then now the onus is on us. If I look in the mirror, if I ask myself, if I ask my friends, if I ask my peers, if I ask my spouse, would they describe me remotely the same way? Right? And that's scary, right? Because holding the Qur'an, being a carrier of the Qur'an in its character is a very tall order. Very tall task. It's difficult. That is what Allah asks of us. There were even times in the life of the Prophet ﷺ where the Qur'an transformed him. The Qur'an pushed him forward. Right? When the Prophet of Allah ﷺ first received revelation, اقرأ بسم ربك الذي خلق, there was a period of time where he did not receive revelation. And there's a difference of opinion, whether it was 3 days or 15 days, and a very weak opinion was that it was 3 years. That's not a very strong opinion. Some scholars held it, however, that has been refuted. That there was a number of days after Iqra where the Prophet of Allah ﷺ did not receive any revelation. He was distraught. He thought maybe I went crazy. But then Allah revealed, مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى Surah Al-Duha. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. By the morning light. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. When the night comes. مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Your Lord has not abandoned you. Your Lord does not hate you. That is not who Allah is. And that pushed him forward because people were starting to doubt him. There is a moment in the life of the Prophet. Let's fast forward. When he's leaving Mecca, he's migrating. He's tried to bring Islam to his people for 13 years. More or less, they have been stubborn, they have been arrogant, they have been ignorant, and they have tortured the Prophet and his companions. They have killed some of his companions. They have humiliated them. So the Prophet of Allah ﷺ, after 13 years, was commanded by Allah, go to Medina. He's leaving. He left. He's with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. He's leaving. He's in Juhfa, which is halfway between Mecca and Medina. And he doesn't take the main road because he had bounty hunters chasing him with the bounty on his head, dead or alive. So he doesn't take the main road. And then on the way to Medina, he gets off the side road and gets onto the main road. And then in that moment, he looks back to Mecca and he recognizes the path back to Mecca. He recognizes that road. That's a road that he has traveled many times for his trade, for his business. He's looking at that road. He looks back to Mecca. He's with Abu Bakr and he begins to just cry. He breaks